Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have questions for everybody. But before I do, I have a question for you, Madam Chair. I'm just reading some of the, this is a post from Fox News saying that Andy Harris, who's our colleague, the head of the chair of the Freedom Caucus, has said that he will vote no on the rule when this rule comes before the full committee. He said that he will vote no on the rule for the big, beautiful bill. He said that I don't think it's going to be in the next couple of days, but it's going to have to be a compromise between the House and the Senate, basically saying we're not there yet. I guess if the head of the Freedom Caucus is now publicly announcing he's against not the bill but the rule, then what the hell are we doing here? Because if you lose 3 or 4 members, then we're spinning our wheels here. So do you have any information on how many Republicans are going to vote no on the rule? Because I can assure you every Democrat is voting no on the rule.
No, sir. And as you know, we are the Speaker's Committee, and it's our task to hold this hearing on the bill, and we'll continue until we're given directions that there is no chance that the rule or the bill will pass.
Okay, I just wanted my colleagues to know that, and I'll keep announcing as people on the Republican side announce that they're voting against the rule, because I think that's relevant information. But
thank you, Mr. McGovern.
I just want to say for the record, I mean, Chairman Smith said that Democrats said that this bill is only for billionaires. That's absolutely not what I said in my opening remarks. And I'll say it again, this bill mostly benefits the well-off, but I said I would support, some of the tax relief in this bill. The bottom line is that I support extending the tax benefits for the middle class. Told you I supported tax relief for, on tips. And so I think we have some consensus there. Where there is disagreement, I think on the tax stuff, is the millionaires and billionaires. And I don't know whether you felt you were constrained for time in your opening testimony or not, but you didn't say anything about the benefits, why there's tax relief for millionaires and billionaires. So you might want to. I'm happy to give you the time now to explain why do we need tax relief for millionaires and billionaires, especially when people are worried about increasing the debt and, people losing health care and SNAP benefits, but this is going to cost us. So why does Jeff Bezos need a tax break?
Ranking Member McGovern, usually when you hear people say that we're cutting taxes for millionaires and billionaires, they point to Section 199A, which is the small business deduction. Almost 80% of all businesses in the United States are pass-through entities. And by making that permanent, that small business deduction, that is what helps create so many jobs. And that is where your side of the aisle continues to talk about the millionaires and billionaires. And the other section that you talk about is
Jeff Bezos not getting a tax break in this bill?
The other section that you all are talking about within tax cuts is that we're keeping existing tax rates as they are today, moving permanently. We're not reducing those tax rates. We're just keeping them the same. So the fact that we're keeping them the same, you're saying that we're giving Jeff Bezos a tax cut.
But he gets a tax cut in this bill. I mean, I'm looking at at some of the statistics here. According to the way I interpret this bill, the top 1% get 22% of the benefit. The top 5% get 43% of the benefit. The top 10% get 52% of the benefit, and the top 20% get 66% of the benefit. And I don't know about your district, but most small businesses in my district are multimillionaires or billionaires. And you mentioned the child tax credit in your opening. The child tax credit goes down next year because Republicans designed it that way. You made it temporary, but you made tax cuts for corporations permanent. So that's why we're dealing with that. You know, Republicans want to pretend that this bill provides meaningful tax relief to families through their child tax credit modifications. This is patently false. In fact, what Republicans are doing with the child tax credit in this bill is in many ways even worse than doing nothing at all. Under this backwards proposal, 1 in 3 children in America will be ineligible for the full child tax credit. That means millions of American citizen children will lose access to this life-changing assistance that they're currently receiving. In addition, families making more than $400,000 per year will be able to get the full value of the credit, but inexplicably, lower-income families will get nothing or just a fraction of that due to how Republicans structured the tax credit. So the official nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation estimated that next year, if this bill passes, 17 million American citizen children will be blocked from getting the full value of the credit. Now, Republicans claim that they want people to work, but that's just false, because this bill actually strips the child tax credit away from children whose parents do work but just don't earn enough. So under your proposal, even if parents work full-time for an entire year, they'll earn too little to get the full credit if they're paid minimum wage. And again, this is all happening while some of us are astonished by the way that the tax benefits seem to go toward those at the top. And the people who are, this is not just me or Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee expressing concern about that. I mean, the Children's Hospital Association put out a statement opposing this bill, saying the new version of the budget reconciliation bill is a crisis for children's health care, hospitals, and providers nationwide, and we ask Congress to oppose it, as an act to support America's children. But again, I didn't really get a good answer to why Jeff Bezos needs a tax break. Ms. Moore, I want to make sure that I have this straight, because I talked about this, previously, and I couldn't believe it, but the House bill got rid of the nearly 100-year-old excise tax on gun silencers, right? But that wasn't enough for the Senate. They also got rid of the tax on sawed-off shotguns. I mean, I got to admit, I'm not much of a gun enthusiast, as some of my colleagues here might be, but I would imagine that it's easier to conceal a sawed-off shotgun or rifle, under your clothes. So Republicans are basically doubling down on what I call the hitman handout. Congresswoman Moore, am I right about that? How much would the hitman handout cost taxpayers? And can you talk about any other special interest giveaways in this bill?
Well, thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern, for that question. The Senate got rid of the tax on sawed-off shotguns. You're absolutely correct. So there will be no tax on sawed-off shotguns.
Are there any other little giveaways that we know about, or are we going to have to wait for a few days before we find out if there are other?
Well, I think that some other things that we're seeing is that while we're cutting educational opportunity for millions of people, we do provide a tax credit for the so-called choice program that will provide tax credits to those investors that invest in non-public education. We also see that there's a special carve-out for banks of certain loans that will not be taxed. Of course, we do see the protectionist movement toward fossil fuels.
Yeah. I'm just saying, I think in the coming weeks, we're going to find, coming days, if this becomes law, we're going to find out more stuff. I know, Mr. Smith, I know he wanted to.
Right, and of course, you remember the silencer.
Oh, yeah, no, which is, I don't, but Mr. Smith, did you want to respond to why Jeff Bezos deserves a tax cut?
I would be happy to talk about the tax on suppressors and the short barrel rifles that you were asking.
Yeah, but that wasn't my question, but you can, if you want to talk about, explain to us, people want to know, like, why does someone like Jeff Bezos need a tax cut when all this other stuff is being cut? And I think that's not an outrageous question. It's what's on a lot of people's minds. By the way, not just Democrats, but independents and Republicans. That's why all the polling, that's what the polling tells us, is that people don't quite get it. But if there's a quick answer as to why Jeff Bezos or people who earn what he earns deserve a tax cut, then I'm happy to yield to you.
So I'll just say the reality is this legislation is specifically focused on delivering more jobs, permanent tax cuts, and bigger paychecks for hardworking Americans. That's why the no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and the tax relief for
He
seniors.
just spent,
And
he just
Mr.
spent
McGovern.
$50 million on a wedding, and he's getting a tax cut. But whatever. But
I didn't get invited.
Mr.
Did you
McGovern,
get
I did
invited?
find the answer to your question.
yeah.
The $2 billion tax cut on the sawed-off shotguns and so forth comes to about $2 billion.
Thank you. The dedicated, nonpartisan civil servants at the Congressional Budget Office, provide fact-based estimates on how much bills will cost the American taxpayer, how many people will gain or lose health coverage, and other important quantifiable pieces of information that all of us, I think, want to have before voting on legislation. And we should be thanking them for the work that they do, and yet Republicans vilify them now. I don't know why. Maybe because Republicans may be threatened by the facts, but I think the facts are important. We need to know how many people are going to lose their health care. We need to know how many people are going to lose their nutrition assistance. We need to know how much it's going to add to the debt. Chairman Arrington, I mean, do you agree with CBO's analysis that this bill will add $3.3 trillion to the deficit? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. As the current chair of the Budget Committee, do you agree with President Trump that CBO is, quote, run by Democrats?
I think they are mostly Democrats, and most likely they're biased in that regard
Right. Well,
philosophically.
in fact, the current director of the CBO is a Republican.
Yeah.
And that's according to a recent interview he gave with the Wall Street Journal.
That's
And
true.
do you know what you said about the current CBO director when he was reappointed to his position 2 years ago?
Probably something good, I
Yeah,
hope.
you did. You said he has the two key ingredients to faithfully execute the role as our nation's budget scorekeeper, objectivity and integrity. And then now we hear a whole different version because Republicans don't like the numbers. And it's not just CBO saying that your bill will cost trillions. It's every budget modeling organization with any credibility. Do you agree with the Yale Budget Lab that your bill will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, even when accounting for growth? Yes or no?
I probably disagree with most of what's coming out of Yale
Do you
University.
agree with the
Including that.
Penn-Wharton budget model that your bill will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, even when accounting for growth?
I disagree.
Do you agree with the right-leaning tax foundation that your tax cuts will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, even when accounting for growth?
I disagree with every organization you've mentioned because of a growth rate assumption.
And they account for growth. Do you agree with the right-leaning American Enterprise Institute that your bill will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, even when accounting for growth?
May I make a clarification? I
Yeah.
mean, you're running through a pretty good list, but
I'm
think
almost done with it.
I think I'll let you finish.
I mean, do you agree with the Tax Policy Center that your tax cuts will
No,
add
sir.
trillions of dollars to the deficit?
I don't.
And what about the House Freedom Caucus? That these tax cuts will, they have a lower estimate, but will add over $1 trillion to the deficit and is way more expensive than the House passed bill.
Here's my position. I don't think Democrats or Republicans have gotten serious about addressing the cumulative deficits into the future. And even when President Trump, before he put his hand on the Bible and took his oath for a second term, CBO projected $20 trillion. So I think a lot of organizations will lump the entire $20 trillion. What I would say is this bill is focused on the growth part of the fiscal health equation. And what we have attempted to do is make sure we don't make the deficit problem worse while reaching out to my Democrat colleagues.
So you would disagree with the Freedom Caucus then? I assume that's one of the reasons why Andy Harris is voting against the rule is because he's concerned about what this is going to add to the
I think there are a
deficit
number
debt.
of people concerned about that issue, Mr. McGovern, to be honest with you.
Yeah, in March, you said, and I quote, "If the Senate is simply using current policy to get tax cuts permanent while avoiding or skirting the responsibility to bring down spending commensurately, then that is a non-starter." That's end quote.
Yeah.
Then in our April hearing on the budget, when I asked you if you were here supporting a non-starter, you told me I opposed the notion that in the final reconciliation bill that we would have a deficit increase on the watch of a party that claims fiscal responsibility as a core principle. And as recently as June 10th, you signed a letter that said, and I quote, "We remain unequivocal in our position that any additional tax cuts must be matched dollar by real enforceable spending reductions. That union is the cornerstone of the House framework adopted in Section 4001 of H-Con Res 14, and it's the minimum standard for our support," end quote. So you've been very consistent in your demands, and so I have to ask you, did the Senate follow the House's reconciliation restrictions?
They did not.
All right, I mean, according to the latest analysis from the Committee on Responsible Federal Budget, the Senate violated the House's instructions by over $500 billion, and the final bill will add $4 trillion to the national debt, including interest. So here we are with a final bill that does something that you called a non-starter, that violates your core principles, and that doesn't meet what you called the minimum standard for your support. Have your core principles changed since April? I mean,
No, sir.
I mean, do words minimum and non-starter not mean what I think that they mean? Like, I don't understand, like, why, I mean, if I were on the right of this, I mean, I don't know why, you know, you wouldn't take this opportunity maybe to follow Lisa Murkowski's advice to, you know, maybe have a conference with the Senate and try to work something out. You know, it seems that everything that
You
everybody.
may be onto something.
Yeah, well, it's it. Well, and again, if that's the case, then I don't know why we're here in the Rules Committee taking up your time. But Ranking Member Boyle, it seems to me to be the prevailing view of literally every credible budget expert across the country that the Republicans' proposal will blow a multi-trillion-dollar hole in our debt. Even Republicans can't seem to get their stories straight. The Trump White House claims that the bill will reduce the deficit by trillions using magic math. Senate Republicans are opting to pretend that $4 trillion in tax cuts don't count as new tax cuts. And a select few House Republicans, like Congressman Massey, and I hate to add to his misery, Congressman Roy, actually admit that the bill will raise the deficit. Ranking Member Boyle, can you explain in very simple terms what Republicans are doing here by ignoring current law and using an alternative way to estimate the cost of their bill? And is it true that the new version of the bill adds hundreds of billions more to the deficit than what the House Republicans passed earlier this year?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member McGovern. I have to give Republicans credit for this. They have been able to get left-leaning groups and right-leaning groups both on the same side, saying exactly the same thing, that this bill adds trillions of dollars to our deficit and debt. To be specific, $4 trillion. Now, one of the ways, process-wise, that the Senate Republicans achieve this is actually truly historic. Ever since 1974, we have operated under the Budget and Impoundment Control Act. That's what created House Budget Committee, Senate Budget Committee. It's what gave birth to the Congressional Budget Office. It was to ensure that all members would have accurate numbers. The official scorekeepers, the Congressional Budget Office, would initiate 10-year projections. And within the process known as reconciliation that was created, these numbers needed to add up. If you were going to have new spending, it needed to be paid for. If you were going to give out tax cuts, that also needed to be accounted for, either through cuts or additional revenue elsewhere. Ever since 1974, we have used something called the current law baseline. So, for example, with these tax cuts, the original 2017 TCJA tax cuts, they're set to expire midnight December 31st of this year. If you want to extend them the following day, the following month, the following year, following decade, so be it, you have to pay for it. Now, because of this legislation, for the first time in 51 years, that will be violated by switching to something that's called current policy baseline. It is an intellectually bankrupt concept. Current policy baseline is jargon for essentially this concept. I bought a donut this morning. I paid for that donut. Now, tomorrow, and the next day, and every day for the rest of my life, that donut will cost me nothing. According to current policy baseline, that is true. This bill uses, make no mistake about it, current policy baseline. And again, because I'm being magnanimous, I want to give Republicans credit. You have just solved Democrats' problem and come up with the way Democrats will pay for Medicare for all. You have actually solved it by using current policy baseline. This is a new precedent that has been set, and when this bill becomes law, if it, God forbid, does become law, this will be the new standard that the Democratic side of the aisle will absolutely follow from now on.
Well, I thank you for that. Chairman Thompson, I want to go to something that Ranking Member Craig mentioned in her opening, because I think this is important. When our committee marked up this big, ugly bill in May, I recall you saying that your bill protects veterans. In fact, you actually took credit for the exemptions from work requirements for veterans, former foster youth, and homeless people that were signed into law as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And as we're here now with a bill that actually gets rid of the protections for veterans, for former foster youth, and for homeless individuals, Mr. Chairman, I know you know this, but I'll lay this out for members in this room who don't serve on the Agriculture Committee like us, and for people watching this at home. This means if this bill gets signed into law, veterans, former foster youth ages 18 to 24, and homeless individuals will now be kicked off of their SNAP benefits after 3 months. So a 64-year-old veteran who can't find a job has nowhere left to turn. I mean, he will go hungry in 3 months. A 19-year-old girl, a 19-year-old who lived a complicated life in and out of different foster homes gets SNAP for 3 months, and then she's out of luck. A person who can't find stable housing and is trying to find a place to stay is kicked off of his food benefits in 90 days. And so, you know, when we're talking about people being hurt, I mean, these are the people that we're talking about. And so my question for you, I mean, do you support removing the protections for veterans?
Well, Mr. McGovern, I'm hesitant to correct you, but my statement was President Biden was the one that was pushing those three populations of having them exempt. From what I saw, and I complained about this at this time in those negotiations, we were cheating those three populations from greater opportunity because we were not going to be able to provide them access to the SNAP employment and career and technical education benefit, which we invest significant monies on. If they can't work, as you know, being on the committee as long as what you have been, and being a champion for nutrition, which I appreciate your passion, that there's two other alternatives: is an average of 80 hours a week working, or 80 hours of volunteer work a month. I'm sorry, 80 hours a month, yeah, of working, volunteering, or engaged in, and quite frankly, it's my favorite. I'll be honest with you. It's engaged in 80 hours of SNAP employment and career and technical education. And so just because somebody can't find a job doesn't mean their benefits stop after 3 months. They could volunteer an average of 80 hours a month and still be eligible. Or better yet, let's give them a shot at the American dream, which is not stuck in poverty. It's having access to that ladder of opportunity.
Well, I want to make sure that I'm not misquoting you here, because this was from 5/14/25, and you said, quote, "This committee, Mark, continues to exempt veterans. That was part of the negotiations I reached with President Biden during the Fiscal Responsibility Act negotiations. Our veterans are exempt from the SNAP work requirement. That is the law. We are not proposing to change the law."
Well, those
you
negotiations
So now
are,
you
negotiations are give and take. That was
Yeah.
not my position. I thought we were cheating those three populations. And the House version did leave them intact, given the fact that they would naturally expire on their own after just a few
And
years.
with respect that somehow we're cheating them of opportunities, I mean,
Well,
okay.
if we're leaving them stuck in poverty, we're cheating them.
Most states operate voluntary programs and can assign people who are interested in SNAP E&T to the program regardless of work status. These programs are severely limited.
That's right, and
Due
they
to
were
a history of
exempt under-
underfunding by both the state and the federal government. So even if you're subject to the paperwork requirements, there's no guarantee that you can participate in training because states don't have enough spaces. So this bill subjects millions of new people to the time limit in SNAP, and there aren't nearly enough E&T slots. So to put it in perspective, there were just over 300,000 ENT slots total. The demand is high. And we aren't here talking about more funding for ENT. We are here talking about you kicking more people off of benefits. And just to be honest about what you're doing, please, I think it's important to state that. I don't know, Ranking Member Craig, whether you want to add.
Mr. Ranking
Yeah.
Member, I got to
I'm happy
say,
to- no,
I
you're-
would challenge you to say there are not plenty of volunteer opportunities in every community.
And people's lives are very complicated. In case you're not out and about in your districts, people's lives are very complicated. People don't fit into these nice, neat categories that everybody, that you all outline. That is, life is not, doesn't fall into black and white categories. They a lot of gray area in terms of how complicated people's lives are. Ranking Member Craig?
I would just add, Ranking Member, that these are people who serve this nation in our military, and we each know them. We know homeless veterans, we know those who are suffering with mental illness, and the idea that we are going to take food away from them in their time of need because they can't work 80 hours a month, to me, it's un-American.
Yeah, and I find this a particularly cruel provision in the bill. Ranking Member Craig, this bill sets up a massive new bureaucratic system forcing states to, for the first time ever, cover the cost of providing benefits to people. States have no clue how they're going to come up with the hundreds of millions of dollars to cover SNAP benefits. I mean, CBO and 23 governors wrote to us to say that states may be forced to drop out of SNAP entirely due to the increased cost. States not offering SNAP benefits to people would be catastrophic. It would make hunger exponentially worse in this country and push people deeper into poverty. And I can't even begin to guess what kind of long-term consequences that would have on healthcare costs, workplace productivity, and educational outcomes. So you don't have to take my word for it. We had 23 governors write to Congress, and they said, quote, if states are forced to end their SNAP programs, hunger and poverty will increase, child and adults will get sicker, grocery stores in rural areas will struggle to stay open, people in agriculture and the food industry will lose their jobs, and state and local economies will suffer, end quote. I ask unanimous consent to insert their letter into the record. Yeah, and in some states, I know Minnesota is one of them, and you mentioned this. And by the way, Mr. Pallone and Ms. Moore, New Jersey and Wisconsin are also on that list. Counties will be on the hook for a portion of that cost. In Minnesota, I think counties will be on the hook for coming up with $43 million per year to continue offering benefits. I know you do your homework, Ms. Craig, and I know you talked to county officials about this. Do county officials in Minnesota have confidence that they can come up with $43 million a year? And if they can't, then what happens?
No, Mr. Ranking Member, they do not. In fact, those county commissioners in Minnesota have been burning up my cell phone all weekend long. States already have skin in the game. 50% of the cost share for administering SNAP goes to the states. And in some states, that cost is even higher. In Minnesota, for example, the cost of administering SNAP, mostly, it's about 80%, falls on the counties. And this bill shifts more of the cost for federal food assistance programs onto them. I've heard from a bunch of them in the last 24 hours. And today, the Minnesota Star Tribune, the headline, front page, was Trump's federal spending bill could force Minnesota counties to raise property taxes. Realistically, Mr. Ranking Member, the only thing that those Minnesota counties are going to be able to do with this unfunded mandate is either raise local taxes, county property taxes, or they're going to have to not fund other priorities in the county.
So this could end up being a tax increase at the state level or at the county level, I mean, in order to be able to make sure that people have the basic necessity of food.
Yeah, for many Minnesotans, the tax increase at the local level is going to just completely offset. It's going to be much, much more than the tiny little tax decrease that some of the folks here are suggesting people may end up with. Look, it's a lose-lose for Minnesotans, but, Virginia, New Jersey, the members on this committee, the Rules Committee, and I would suspect a lot of the folks here, Mr. McGovern, don't actually know about this yet, or you've only learned about it in recent days. Colorado, Ohio, and in particular, North Carolina and New Jersey, where counties pay actually 100% of the administrative cost. In fact, I have a statement here from the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners that was issued last week that I'd like to read because I think it should be incredibly important to members of the Rules Committee across the aisle. By reducing federal funding and shifting administrative costs to state and local governments, Congress would force North Carolina and its counties to replace tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue, either by generating new funds through increased taxes or redirecting them from other essential programs. Should the state be unwilling or unable to replace the SNAP benefit reductions, individual counties will be forced to choose between diverting funding from their own programs, raising local taxes, or watching their residents go without this important safety net. Local governments are most disadvantaged to replace SNAP funding. The best way to ensure our residents receive this benefit is to preserve federal funding. It's just really, truly difficult, Mr. McGovern, to see how the people in this room could support a bill that is going to increase taxes at the county level on so many of the states across this country.
And I think this is a big deal. It's a big change. And I do think this should have been the subject of hearings, and we should have heard from people from all around the country as to how they would potentially deal with it or not deal with it, and what the impact would be. I mean, the cynic in me says that maybe part of the deal is to get states to opt out of SNAP and to not provide people a food benefit and just take that off the table. You know, but this is going to have an impact that I think most states don't even have a clue of, right, of what it's going to mean to them. Yeah.
If I may, Mr. McGovern, the CBO scores that you quoted, that was actually when there was state share, that was scored at a state share of 50%.
Well, that was
Which was which is outrageous. And of course, the Senate made some refinements to the process. Any error rates under 6% is a zero cost share. The idea here is not to punish anyone. It's to incentivize the states to do a better job.
And
Because
understand
it's
too
the
that error rates
the
include underpayments to people. Yeah.
Well, underpayments or
yeah,
overpayments, because overpayments get clawed back, and that hurts people in future months.
I would encourage us all to read what actually came back from the Senate, because in fact, 10 states in this country are not going to be subject to the cost shift that others are as a result of a last-minute deal cut over in the Senate by one U.S. senator. And for that matter, I just say last night, the governor of Pennsylvania warned that his state, your state here, some of you here, might
had
have to
abusive
opt
numbers.
out of the program, leaving 2 million people without federal food assistance if these cuts become law. The consequences for that are health, our rates of childhood obesity, of hunger for economy. It would be devastating if this happens.
And just one quick question. Are undocumented immigrants in SNAP?
No, of course they aren't, by federal law. And look, every member of this committee should just go on their phone. I know you all know how to use a phone. The USDA website clearly states, this is a direct quote, SNAP is not and has never been available to undocumented non-citizens. Only American citizens and certain other select groups of documented, that means they're in this country legally, non-citizens may receive SNAP. It's embarrassing that any member of Congress would actually
No,
say
but
that.
I thank you for saying that, because I've heard some of my Republican colleagues on talk shows talking about that.
They aren't, and they never
I don't
have
know
been.
what they're talking about. I just have one last set of questions for Energy and Commerce. Mr. Guthrie, President Trump has said time and time and again, and in fact, he continues to say that Republicans will not touch Medicaid. But it blows my mind that he says that. But anyway, if Republicans enact this bill, you will be in clear and total violation of that promise. This bill, as I read it, includes $930 billion in cuts to Medicaid. That's according to the nonpartisan budget scorekeepers at CBO. But just don't take it from me, or even from the budget experts. Listen to the doctors and the hospitals across the country that say this bill will devastate healthcare in this country. The Children's Hospital Association said, and I quote, "The new version of the budget reconciliation bill is a crisis for children's health care, hospitals, and providers nationwide, and we ask Congress to oppose it as an act of support for America's children. Your child, regardless of their insurance status, could see the services they rely on reduced or eliminated with significantly less support to sustain them. The bill amounts to fewer doctors and nurses to see your child, longer wait times, and sicker children, end quote. Hospitals across the country have raised alarms, including in Louisiana, Ohio, and in your home state of Kentucky. On June 26, the Kentucky Hospital Association said that this bill will force hospitals to close and endanger 20,000 healthcare jobs in your state. In total, estimates suggest that more than 300 rural hospitals and over 500 nursing homes could close because of this legislation. The fact that this bill cuts Medicaid has even been confirmed by key Republicans, including Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, the Chairwoman Fox's home state, who asked, quote, "What do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore?" So, Chairman Guthrie, can you answer that question? Like, what should Senator Tillis tell the hundreds of thousands of people in North Carolina who will be pushed off of Medicaid because of the cuts in funding? And what about the 40,000 people in my district in Massachusetts who will lose their health care? I mean, I think, you think that they deserve to know why cutting these benefits is such a priority, and especially because the offsets are being used, again, not to reduce the deficit or the debt, but to pay for tax cuts for very wealthy people.
Yeah, let me start with, as we were here before, the people who were losing their health insurance on the Medicaid side of it, the people who were most affected, one, were illegal. There are people that are illegal that receive Medicaid benefits through states that choose to do that.
Yeah,
That
not
was,
federal-
that was,
not
that was
federal
birded out of the bill, so that's not part of it. So you got the most.
But never federal Medicaid.
Well, there's two ways to do it. One is they use the federal office that's 90/10, whatever you want to call it, to administer it. So that's what we were looking at, is the administration costs. The other thing is you don't have to verify legal status until 90 days into being on Medicaid. So there's people technically be on Medicaid, and it's scored, so there's no, that it happens with CBO. And that was not allowed in by the Byrd rule. So the other is people that are not eligible because of eligibility rules, and the people that are able to work. It was 4.6 million. That number is of people who were estimated that were able to work. And when we say able to work, it's people all the ones that you talked about with mental health, with all the other, they're exempted out, people with substance use disorder.
Well, according to the Joint Economic Committee, 184,526 people will lose their health care coverage in Kentucky. Are they all deserving to lose their health care benefits?
So I would say if they're able to work and choose not to work, when I say under the restrictions that we have for eligibility, most Kentuckians think, I know there was some criticism that came out from the governor's office of our bill, but if they're defending people that are able to work and they're not working.
That's an awful lot of people in Kentucky. Ranking Member
Well,
Palmer-
Kentucky has one of the lowest workforce participation rates, people who are eligible to work that are working, and they'll be better off if they're working.
Yeah, I want to make just one statement before I go to Mr. Colon. This notion that, all these millions and millions of Americans really are living the easy life, staying home, watching TV, and being on Medicaid and being on SNAP is ludicrous. A food benefit that's on average $2 per meal for an individual. I mean, it's just like, it's so offensive to people in this country. And, I don't know whether you talk to your constituents who are on Medicaid, but I'll tell you, their lives are oftentimes very, very complicated. And I think part of why this bill is so unpopular is because people think you're talking about them.
I agree that people have complicated lives. Not everybody you said it, not everybody fits into a neat category, but it doesn't make sense to let people there are a substantial number, according to studies, of people that are receiving Medicaid that could otherwise be working. That's why we were very careful to sculpt provisions where people that are on substance use disorder,
Right.
people that are mental health, they're all exempted. People with dependent child at home.
Living through the last 24 hours and watching the machinations of the United States Senate trying to add things, take things out, move things around, using the words "very careful" don't seem to apply here. And I'm willing to bet you anything that if this thing becomes law, you'll find out in a few days that there's something in here that none of us knew was in there, or that has an adverse impact on something that we care about, and it's going to be too late to do anything about it. So I'm just telling you, this was not a very careful process. We don't know all of the implications about what is coming before
Well,
us
the
today.
eligibility requirements from the House have stood, and those were very carefully drafted because of the points you made.
So Ranking Member Pallone, Republicans continue to falsely claim that that the only people who will lose health insurance will be undocumented people or people who sit at home watching TV all day. Can you address this point and discuss who will lose health care under this bill, who is actually losing health coverage, and why do they need Medicaid and the ACA?
Well, let me divide the answer in two parts. One is about the people that lose their health insurance, and the second is about the cuts to providers and the children's hospitals and the other things you mentioned. First of all, the Republicans have to stop, I know they won't, but they have to stop saying that the only thing they're doing here is work requirements or paperwork. The bottom line is that if you talk about the $1 trillion that's going to be cut here, or the 17 million people that are going to lose their health insurance, there's probably only a third of that $1 trillion that's related to the paperwork. Now, that's significant because the bottom line is that, it's not fair. Use the Georgia example I've used a million times, where they estimated there were 300,000 or 400,000 people that were eligible for Medicaid expansion, and only 4,500 of those actually got Medicaid because of the paperwork requirements, meaning, you've got to file every month. You have to show that if you're not working, it's, because of a level of disability that's impossible to reach. That's maybe a third of it. The rest of it is all the other cuts, right? So, for example, with regard to the ACA, the subsidies, the enhanced subsidies are gone. So if your health insurance costs you, is valued at, say, $5,200 a year, and you're paying $100 a month, you're now going to have to pay an extra $4,000 that would have been subsidized, and you can't afford it, so therefore you don't get health insurance, right? So this is not primarily about paperwork requirements, although those paperwork requirements are so awful that a lot of people will lose their health insurance. The other thing I was going to say too is that you're talking about the Children's Hospital. This is what the Senate did that made this so much more onerous. We don't talk about CHIP, right? Much. You haven't heard much about that. But what's been done collectively between the House and the Senate with CHIP is devastating, right? So now there are lifetime and annual limits on how much can be spent for a child on CHIP. There are provisions that say that you have to wait 30 days before you're eligible for CHIP. So the children's hospitals are devastated, in part, not only because of Medicaid and the ACA cuts, but also because of the impact on CHIP. And then what the Senate did with the provider tax was even worse, because you understand that there's two things here that hospitals depend on. If they're failing, a state like New Jersey will give them what we call direct state payments so that they don't fail. Those are significantly cut back in the House and the Senate bill. The provider tax, if you say in the House bill, we said, well, we're going to just keep the provider tax the way it is. You can't raise it due to inflation. You can't change it any other way. But they didn't change the status quo. What the Senate did is to scale back and say every year the provider tax is going to be less and less. And then if you don't get that provider tax at the state level, then you can't give the providers, in this case the hospitals and nursing homes, the level of money so that they can actually operate. So look, I don't want to eliminate the emphasis on the paperwork or whatever the Republicans call it, the work requirements. That's devastating enough. But you have to understand that that's a certain percentage of this overall cuts. It's not the majority. A lot of this is just directly cutting these programs and the amount of funding that's coming to the providers.
Right.
That's what's going on here.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie, are you aware how much damage this bill is going to do to the clean energy industry in Kentucky? I mean, I have a letter here addressed to you from manufacturing companies in Kentucky, and the letter states, quote, there are already more than 14,000 clean energy jobs in Kentucky in the battery, manufacturing, automotive, grid infrastructure, critical minerals, and clean energy industries, end quote. The letter further states that $8 billion in announced funding for these industries to your state has yet to be spent and is at significant risk if this bill passed. That sounds like a heck of a lot of jobs. I mean, what do you say to these employers? And and I mean, on the tax portion of this bill, I mean, what do you tell the thousands of people who could lose their jobs from Kentucky, or for that matter, in Missouri, I mean, who want to work in these high-paying industries. I mean, this bill is a job killer and a climate killer.
If they're the largest battery plants are in my district, one battery plant, Ford offers a good product people are going to buy. They were going to build 2 battery plants in my district. They built 2 plants. They're going to equip one because they make a good product and people are going to buy it. They're not going to equip the other. They're looking for other uses for it. The other one is actually in my hometown. And I say this, and I've told people who've asked me about this, I think if people choose to buy an electric vehicle, that's absolutely their choice. I don't think it's the federal government's job to mandate them to do so. And I think it's better off for the American people, regardless of what the specific issues. But I think people are going to end up buying these cars because they're good products. But I don't think that they should be mandated. I just don't think they should be mandated to be bought.
Yeah, well,
Mr.
Yes.
McGovern, our clocks have gone wonky on us. We've now been going about 40 minutes.
no, and I
And I think that's really testing.
No, and I appreciate the chairwoman's admonition, but with all due respect to everybody who's here, I mean, this is a big deal, and we don't even have time to read everything in this bill, and you know, for many of us who have looked at the House bill and tried to follow what's going on in the Senate, we are really worried about how it's going to impact our constituents, and so I get it, but we have no other opportunity to be able to ask these questions and get these answers. And so, again, I apologize to the panel, but this is important, and I will
Can I finish my thought, though?
Oh, yeah, okay.
But if I was a business and my member of Congress was not going to mandate that people buy my product,
But they're not
I might
mandating-
send them a letter as well.
We're not mandating you to buy a product.
Well, they're mandating
No,
you have
we're
to
not.
buy
We're-
electric.
We're actually trying to get an industry off the ground and maybe provide a little help in combating climate change and actually being good to this planet. Yeah, and, so anyway, I think people would rather that than tax cuts for Jeff Bezos. I yield that.